You touched on it earlier, but Camden has a structural deficit and it leaves it in a really tough negotiating position with the state. We saw in 2011 that when the governor decides to cut budgets, Camden is hurt very deeply. How would you deal with a significant loss of funding from the state? And is there a place that you would need to protect and a place you would cut from?
It's very, very difficult to imagine where you would cut to do things. I think we're already on a life support budget because we are a ward of the state. We are dependent on the state for our funding for to run our city. I think there has to be a recognition in coalition with other cities around the state of New Jersey that we need a better urban policy when it comes to cities like Camden, and that goes for economic development. Goes for education. It goes for municipal aid. It goes for um, federal aid on the federal level. How we can bring the resources together. But the idea is essentially there has to be a mutual respect between the city, regardless of our negotiating position, and the state, and the recognition that we need to make Canada work for everyone, not just who the state decides should be helped. Because if we don't fix the entire city, get the entire city going, we'll never get off of state aid. And you've seen, you can do the math from 1990s to today. We're more dependent on state aid than we ever were. But the local finance board of the Department of Community Affairs is responsible for overseeing us directly. And the recommendations that are being made by that board are not necessarily helping us get off of aid. There's no way we're going to run this city on $25 million. I'll tell you that right now. And I'll tell that to the governor. I'll tell that to the local finance board. So if you're telling me that we can run this 9 square mile city with the infrastructure that we have, the abandoned properties that we have, the lack of market and rateable base, and a pathway to building that base, that we have to run our city on less than on our own, or self-sufficiency, as you hear all the time, it's impossible. And we have to recognize that from the door. We're on a life support budget. We need to grow that budget. We need to have a growth budget. And I agree we need a strategy to go along with that. For too many years, every 4 years when you get a new governor, and maybe every 8 years if they're successful, you have a new strategy for Camden. You have a new strategy for the municipal side. You have a new strategy for education. So every time you get a new governor, whether it's Democrat or Republican, you're getting a different strategy. And it's hard to run an organization, hard to develop a workforce, a culture, and so on, when you're always changing the strategy that you're pursuing. Just as you start to get traction, you change the strategy. So looking at that deficit and saying, here's my strategy. Right now we have the workings of a strategy. I'm not 100% on board with it because it expands our nonprofit tax base. 51% of our land and more is now in non-taxable. Take into account these large companies. If you took the value of their investments when they're all built out over 20 years, it's $82 million a year in lost revenue that we're not seeing, that we can fix streets with, that we can start addressing our blighted properties with, improving, professionalizing our customer service, our city services, all these different things. So for us to continue to do that would be very difficult to stomach, and we'd have to change how we approach city Camden.
So these are deep structural and systemic problems that they tie into segregation and challenges in the wider region. And I think I hear what you're saying, which is the plan now seems to be that we're going to give out a lot of tax breaks and hope those companies come online at a later date when the city is stronger. Do you guys have, and does your ticket have, a kind of concrete plan to shrink that budget shortfall, and what does that look like?
The only way we can shrink it is by growing our revenue. So if we if we're going to give Holtec the big piece of land for free for 20 years, and we're going to do Sixers and so on, then we have to have a strategy and resources to pursue that strategy to get the rest of our tax base online. That takes creating how is it, stirring up the market forces again in the city of Camden. That calls the commercial corridors in the city and working to build those into strong marketplaces for residents to purchase from, and then start to see that commercial real estate come back online. And then what follows is when you have a strong amenities in communities, then you start to see the housing come online, the demand for housing. Collingswood and Hannon Avenue in Collingswood is an example of that dynamic where you have quality housing stock and you have quality amenities like Hannon Avenue commercial corridor that creates a lifestyle. So we can do that. We can pursue that. Now, is that going to get us from zero to, for 25 million to 185 million in 4 years? Absolutely not. But the decisions we make today will get us there, and that's the key: making those decisions.